tons of explosives on peaceful cities. Bombings of hospitals, schools, and homes disguised as military targets.
I was asleep. I fell off the couch. From fear, the glass shattered.
A small private house, two 250-kilogram aerial bombs hit it at once.
And the killings of innocent people.
He lay under the rubble. Rescuers tried to revive him for 40 minutes.
How the Russian army disguises the bombing terror of civilians as military objectives. Watch in the special report, Guided Strikes. Russia's aerial bomb terror against Ukraine. From the very beginning of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian army has used guided aerial bombs. In terms of the amount of explosives they carry, they are among the most destructive weapons in Russia's arsenal. Even missiles often fall short of their power. Moreover, bombs are much cheaper, and Russia inherited enormous and frightening stockpiles from the Soviet Union. Originally, such bombs were developed to destroy fortified positions, depots, and concrete structures. But in this war, Russia uses them to demolish civilian infrastructure and terrorize the population. Let us take a closer look at the types of bombs in question. Not all aerial bombs Russia uses against Ukraine are CABs, corrected aerial bombs. This is a separate type of weapon equipped with laser or TV guidance. Russia actively used such bombs in Syria and then again in Ukraine at the start of the full-scale invasion. As experts note, this is a relatively precise weapon if launched correctly and from a short distance.
A typical Soviet caliber, CAB 500, CAB 1500. They are not cruise missiles. The range, for example, with the CAB 500 is just 9 kilometers. It was used literally from the very first days of the war. The circular deviation of such bombs is up to 10 meters.
However, Russia almost immediately abandoned the use of this type of aerial bomb in the war against Ukraine. The reason? The risk of Russian aircraft becoming targets for Ukraine's air defense systems.
The carriers are usually two-seater aircraft, and the operator, for example, on the Su-24, the navigator, must guide the bomb until the very last moment. That is the inconvenience of these bombs. If it is laser-guided, it has to be tracked and aimed at the target the entire time. There is an automatic mode as well, but even then it requires constant supervision.
If we talk about the very start of the full-scale invasion, at first their tactic was simple. They calmly entered Ukrainian airspace and dropped bombs directly over cities. For example, they would fly over Chernihiv and release bombs from their aircraft. But after the liberation of Chernihiv and Sumy regions in late March, early April 2022, their tactics changed. We strengthened our air defense, and now Russians can no longer bomb our territory so easily. In response, they began using new technology called the Unified Planning and Correction Module. Essentially, these are wings attached to a standard aerial bomb.
Thus, Russia began disposing of its massive stockpiles of high-explosive bombs left over from the Soviet Union, stored for decades in warehouses. The bombs themselves became more accurate, thanks to the installation of navigation systems. And with the addition of wings, their range increased. Now they are capable of striking targets far beyond the front line. At the same time, Russian aircraft can launch them without entering Ukrainian airspace, from Russian territory, or from temporarily occupied areas.
They take a standard high-explosive aerial bomb, what we call cast iron. These are unchanged, left over from World War II. A huge shell with fins, a detonator at the front, a free-fall bomb. Then they attach a planning and correction device, essentially a glider with a guidance system, or an inertial system.
In every case, these munitions are significantly cheaper to produce and deploy than air-to-ground missiles. And when it comes to the explosive payload they deliver, the ratio of explosives to total weight is much higher in bombs. Roughly 50% of the weight is pure explosives compared to only 25 to 30% in a missile. This stark difference explains why Russia, intent on inflicting maximum destruction at minimum cost, increasingly turns to these cheaper weapons, which, despite their simplicity, deliver far greater explosive force and devastation on the ground.
The smallest of the high-explosive bombs fitted with the Unified Planning and Correction Module, UMPK, is the FAB-250. It carries about 100 kilograms of explosives. This bomb, along with the more powerful FAB-500, with a 200-kilogram charge, is most often launched at residential buildings. The most destructive are the FAB-1500, containing 1 ton of explosives, and the FAB-3000, with a payload of 1.5 tons. According to Guided Chaos, a study by the Ukrainian NGO Truthhounds, based on open-source data, until recently Russian aircraft used such bombs only within 10 kilometers of the front line. Now, however, FAB-500s with planning and correction modules can reach Kharkiv, launched from Russian territory. The study notes that Russia controls northern Ukraine's airspace from several air bases, particularly Baltimore, Voronezh, Buturlinovka, Voronezh region, and Lipetsk region. Since September 2024, Russian state media have been publishing images of a modernized UMPK. With increased length and improved aerodynamics, the new modification allows bombs to reach targets up to 80 kilometers away. This is known as the Graveyard of Shells, the largest in Ukraine. Here lie more than 2,000 fragments of munitions that Russia has used against Kharkiv and the region since the beginning of the full-scale invasion.
We are now standing at an evidence storage site. Here lie fragments of missiles, munitions, aerial bombs, and loitering munitions that were used to shell Kharkiv. Altogether, there are more than 1,000 pieces of evidence, divided into roughly 15 categories, among them ballistic missile, multiple launch rocket systems, and other weapons of different calibers and ranges.
Among them are remnants of glide bomb kits that carried bombs to their targets.
In this section, we see a UMPK module, a guidance kit used to deliver aerial bombs to their targets. This particular one was designed for FAB-250 and FAB-500 bombs. To the right is a deactivated FAB-500, originally a Soviet freefall bomb, which the Russians now modernize by attaching the UMPK wing module. Once released, the wings unfold in midair, allowing the bomb to glide and travel as far as 100 kilometers toward its target.
Here is the aftermath of one such strike. A FAB-250 hit a residential building in the Saltivka district. The Su-34 launched it from Russia's Belgorod region. 40 people were injured. An elderly woman living on the top floor was killed.
These strikes cause massive fires and widespread destruction, especially to residential buildings. Entire floors collapse. Tragically, there have been cases where people were crushed under concrete debris because the blast wave from these bombs is devastating.
What it feels like to experience the shockwave of a half-ton bomb firsthand is something German military journalist Julian Röpke knows all too well. While on assignment in Kharkiv, he stayed in a private home in the city's suburbs.
I personally also experienced them in Kharkiv city when I was there, and it feels like an earthquake when these bombs are hitting nearby. We don't know what was the target. Maybe it was a factory nearby. We have no idea about this, but I can just tell you, and I think many Ukrainians know this, that if you have this FAB-500, so half-a-ton bomb hitting nearby, it really feels like an earthquake. Everything is shaking. The room is shaking. The windows are shaking.
Using the tactic of mass bombardment with Soviet-era explosive scrap metal, the Russian army managed to capture Avdiivka. Russian aviation operated there almost with impunity, inflicting severe damage not only on Ukrainian defenders, but on the town itself. Because of the sheer size of the bombs, from 250 to 1,500 kilograms, even imprecise strikes caused catastrophic destruction.
A 1,500 kilogram bomb carries a warhead weighing 1,010 kilograms, of which at least 750 kilograms are pure explosives. By comparison, a cruise missile carries just 450 kilograms, which means if a missile strike can collapse one entrance of a 9-story apartment block, the impact of a UPAB-1500 or a FAB fitted with UMPK-1500 can bring down the entire building.
Avdiivka is still very dear to me, and it is painful to watch what happened there because despite its proximity to the front line, the city was developing, it was being built up. Your favorite mural on the side of a building, you remember how it was painted, how artists from Western Ukraine came to create it, and then you see nothing but a massive hole.
The Donetsk front. Russian forces attempt to encircle Pokrovsk, using the same scorched earth tactics. Bombardments with every type of weapon, including guided aerial bombs. On July 16th, volunteer and war correspondent Anastasia Rokitna of RBC Ukraine witnessed the impact of a half-ton UMPK bomb on Dobropilia. By July 25th, forced evacuation of the town had begun.
I was just 200 meters from the explosion. The blast wave caught me.
27 people were injured. 4 were killed. The bomb struck during rush hour.
There were a lot of people. It was that time of day. Mothers with children walking, locals returning from work. It's the town center, a small city, a busy spot. It was 5 in the evening. We had gathered with colleagues to discuss work. We sat outside just talking. Suddenly, my friend said, "Look, a plane?" I didn't even have time to react. The explosion came instantly. I turned my head left and saw the flash, black smoke, fire. We dropped to the ground, covered our heads with our hands, and just waited. Then we got up and ran.
Now undergoing rehabilitation, Anastasia says she will continue her mission, documenting Russian war crimes on the front line and supporting Ukrainian soldiers.
It's terrifying to go back. Your brain tells you there will be a repeat strike. You've already lived through the trauma and fear. But you still have to do it. As the guys say, it's all about character.
Russia wants Kostiantynivka to share the fate of Pokrovsk. Within 15 minutes, up to 9 FAB-250 bombs can hit the city, not counting other types of weapons. More than 8,000 residents remain. All of them, like the civilian infrastructure, are direct targets. Alyona Gramova, frontline correspondent for Freedom, documents the horrifying consequences of regular airstrikes on residential buildings, hospitals, schools, businesses, targets Russia tries to portray as military. In reality, only civilians pay the price.
One of the latest cases is Oleksieva Drushkivka, a small village located near Kostiantynivka. A yard, a small house. Judging by the ruins that remained, one could assume there had been a garage, maybe a small summer kitchen, and a modest private house. 2 bombs hit there, 250-kilogram aerial bombs. The mistress of the house was killed, and at that moment her relative, a nephew who had come to help her with household chores and stayed overnight, was also there. Local residents, neighbors, tried to somehow help extract the victims before the rescuers arrived. They could not do it. It required special equipment. Only late at night did the rescuers recover the 2 bodies.
On July 22, 2025, at 4:40 a.m., Russian aviation dropped FAB-250 bombs with UMPK on residential houses in Sloviansk and Kramatorsk.
It was 4:30 in the morning. I was sitting on the bed, and then everything shook. I opened the window for airing, just stepped away, thought it was still early, and lay down. Then I thought, what is falling? It was just such a bang. The window frame saved me. It covered me. The blanket was there. The glass and light fixtures were blown out. I was sleeping. I fell off the couch from fright. The glass shattered. The cat ran away. I searched for him half the day.
A guided aerial bomb destroyed 3 apartments on the upper floors. In one of them was Anastasia's 10-year-old son, Timur. They had come to their hometown on business. First, they stayed with Anastasia's sister. Then the boy wanted to visit his grandmother.
He called his grandmother, my mom, asked her to come for him. He said, Mom, I liked being with Grandma so much, and you still have to come back in a week anyway. Let me stay a bit longer, I said. No, son, we'll definitely go home already. But we didn't.
That day, Anastasia says, she and her son were supposed to return to Kiev, but her child died under the rubble as a result of the Russian strike.
In the death report, it was written, blast injury, mechanical asphyxia with compression of the chest and abdomen. They pulled him out too late. He was resuscitated for 40 minutes.
A photo of Timur on the roof of that same building, taken the day before the tragedy, is the last one in Anastasia's phone gallery. 2 years earlier, Timur's father had died. He fought in the Luhansk direction. The son had been Anastasia's only joy and support.
He was a cheerful boy, mature beyond his years. You could talk to him as to an adult. He was so wise.
The Russian army took from Anastasia not only her dearest ones, it is also systematically destroying her hometown, the place her son so longed to return to.
When he was little, we could just go out in the morning, mostly in our neighborhood. We didn't want to leave at all. He loved it very much, and I loved it too, until that moment. He dreamed of returning home.
There is no end to the terror against the civilian population and the tactic of total destruction of civilian infrastructure by Russian occupiers. The Russian army continues to use new modifications of guided munitions against peaceful settlements. In March 2024, Russian aviation dropped on Kharkiv Russian glide bombs, more precisely projectiles, UMPB-D30SN, Unified Inter-Service Glide Munitions. One fell near the Institute of Emergency Surgery. The second, in a residential district. 19 people were injured. Among them were 4 children. A 70-year-old man was killed.
This is a hybrid of a bomb and a rocket artillery projectile. What makes it different from an ordinary shell are the wings. If that one flies only like a rocket, this one can cover a greater distance thanks to gliding from altitude.
This is essentially a single mechanism of this bomb. The massive explosive is about 100 kilograms. The payload of this UMPB is very similar to the FAB-250. It's the same 100 kilograms, but they improved the flight range.
The danger lies in the fact that, you see, there's no point in, for example, trying to intercept or shoot down such projectiles. It's not a cruise missile, not an aeroballistic or ballistic missile. It's essentially a cheap analog of a cruise missile, except without an engine. Basically the best aerial bomb without UMPK, meaning it has its own wings. And the problem is that it flies somewhat farther than, say, the FAB with UMPK. If that one flies, say, 75 kilometers or a bit more, the UMPB exceeds 100.
The most cynical use of this munition came 2 months later. Russian aviation struck a construction hypermarket on a Saturday, when the store was packed with people. 19 people were killed. More than 50 were injured.
Tell me, during your work at Epicenter, have you ever witnessed any military equipment or soldiers being here?
Never once.
Failing to reach military targets on the front line, Putin wages war against civilians, trying to drive people into complete despair and force them to agree to anything just to stop the slaughter. The Russian occupiers are counting on Ukrainian citizens pressuring the government, even up to acts of sabotage. Guided bombs against civilian infrastructure are not so much a war against the armed forces of Ukraine as they are terror aimed at exhausting the civilian population. In their report, Guided Chaos: How Russian Aerial Bombs Destroy Civilians and Infrastructure, OSINT investigators from Truthhounds found yet another confirmation of Russian terror against the civilian population of Ukraine. Data analysis and eyewitness testimony showed that Russian forces are actively using different types of guided aerial bombs with an error radius of more than 200 meters, leading to massive destruction of civilian infrastructure and numerous human casualties.
A very telling case, once they launched their bombs at the Axioma residential complex in Kharkiv, UMPB. The cynicism of this attack lies in the following. They struck the Axioma complex, and 2 months later, they hit the building of the Eastern Regional Directorate of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, located just 200 meters from the Axioma complex, but this time with Iskander missiles. Essentially, they knew they couldn't hit precisely, but still struck and hit the residential complex, and then 2 months later switched to Iskanders, meaning they have the ability to strike more accurately, but they choose to terrorize the civilian population.
The Russian tactic is intimidation and terror of the local population. From the logic of these strikes, we draw such conclusions. In daytime, when people are at work, moving around the city, and that is exactly when these aerial bombs hit. Civilian districts, residential areas, which once again confirms this theory.
The enemy is increasingly launching aerial bombs deeper into rear areas. Here is one of the recent attacks on a bus station in Zaporizhia. It was 70% destroyed, 19 people were injured.
And even if they want to hit some targets in the city that are formally legitimate, say an arms production site, some workshop, when you use for that inherently inaccurate weapons, which can fall either 100 meters this way or 250 meters that way, that is a violation of international rules of warfare. If they hit once out of 5 or 10, that's excellent. If not, then they hit a nearby hospital, or a residential house, or just a roadway where bus passengers might suffer. That doesn't particularly concern them.
They say yes, maybe most of our bombs, let's say, as I said, 75% are hitting 100, 200 meters to the left or to the right. This is still okay for us if 25% are hitting the target because, different from the Ukrainian Air Force, the Russians are not short of planes, and the Russians are not short of airports to launch, and the Russians are not short of bombs. This is the big problem here.
To counter bomb terror, Ukraine's air defense requires strengthening.
First of all, planes need to be destroyed. That's what the defense forces focus on. If you try to shoot down every aerial bomb aimed at Kharkiv, and there are dozens or even hundreds weekly, the stock of air defense missiles will be quickly depleted. The main problem lies in radar detection systems and missiles of sufficient range that could destroy such targets. Well, we can't say, deploy a system in Lviv Oblast or in Zakarpattia and expect it to effectively work at such distance. It's still a risk, and the main problem is often not in the equipment, but in the crews. You can joke. Making equipment takes a month, but making a person takes 9 months. The most valuable thing is people. Above all, highly qualified and trained specialists.
Tons of bomb fragments, navigation modules, and Russian projectiles collected at the Kharkiv testing ground are only a small portion of the evidence Ukrainian law enforcement is preparing for a future international investigation. There are thousands of such examples all across Ukraine.
These fragments of munitions serve as material evidence and have already undergone expert forensic analysis before being carefully cataloged and stored here. The goal is clear. In the future, when a tribunal examines Russia's responsibility for these strikes, this evidence will be presented. Most of the weaponry was either manufactured or modified in the Russian Federation and bears nomenclature numbers, serial codes, factory markings, and inscriptions. Together, these identifiers will provide indisputable proof of origin and help establish Russia's direct culpability and involvement in the attacks.
To prove the guilt not only of the perpetrators, the bomber pilots and the fighter escorts, but also the senior military officials who gave the orders to kill civilians and destroy towns and villages, independent human rights organizations are also joining the investigations.
The choice of munition in most cases does not correspond to any clear military advantage that Russia could theoretically gain by striking Ukrainian cities. This discrepancy forces us to a troubling conclusion. Either Russia, deliberately, at least in some instances, selects civilian objects as its intended targets, or it chooses military objects but does so while employing weapons in a manner that makes it impossible to concentrate the full destructive force of the projectile on the actual target. In both scenarios, the result is the same: disproportionate destruction, widespread civilian suffering, and evidence that these strikes serve purposes beyond legitimate military objectives.
For the Russian leadership, there are neither rules nor customs of warfare. Their tactics bear all the hallmarks of war crimes.
What is a military target? It's an object whose destruction causes significant harm to the armed forces or industrial sites producing various types of weapons and ammunition. If the strike is on a residential building, it is immediately defined as a war crime. No soldiers, no officers, no headquarters.
All these orders are recorded. You can obtain radio intercept.
Putin is a murderer. Russia is a terrorist state. Because I see no rules of warfare in this war. When civilians suffer, when children die, then we are fighting criminals.
Until recently, peaceful Ukrainian towns and villages became a testing ground for Russian guided aerial bombs. The use of such weapons in densely populated areas is not only devoid of military necessity, but also gives the Russian army no military advantage. It only turns promising, self-sufficient, well-kept communities into ruins. Olga Mihailuk, Natalia Belokudria, Alyona Gramova, Special Report.